Hi, everyone. Welcome to Thursday of #Analytics Week. We appreciate you all sticking on here, and sorry for the short delay, but we'll jump right into it here. Again, this has been our week-long seminar inspired by Albert Einstein and our love of analytics. A little bit about NetElixir. We are a search marketing agency with over 100 team members, and we have been in business for over 12 years. You'll just see a sampling of our customers there on the right. We are a preferred partner of both Google and Bing, and especially Google, as we have our guest speaker from there today. Our solutions really fall into, our search marketing solutions fall into three buckets. Our first is our services. So these are our full service solutions that include paid search and shopping, SEO, as well as paid social management. We also have our own technology marketplace we call LXR Technology. And these are apps, free software downloads, and also some paid tools that can help you optimize your paid search campaigns, as well as check and audit your SEO. And then our third bucket of solutions is our consulting. So this includes full digital marketing strategy, executive dashboards, comprehensive audits, as well as our web analytics packages. And to give you a quick insight into some of our web analytics packages, we have three basic levels, starting with the rookie packages. This includes just basic tracking and implementation validation, one-time e-commerce setup. Our second level is our insights packages. So these are health checks, both essential and advanced, our dashboard setup, reporting and insights, as well as ongoing support as necessary. And our third package we like to call our data junkie package. So here we're getting very, very strategic, really diving into what helps your business succeed and how we can use your analytics to reach your goals. So our Analytics Week topics, on the previous 3 days we've covered 5 mistakes to avoid in Google Analytics, 3 hacks to increase your revenue and profits, and 5 insights into mobile performance. And today we'll be talking about tracking your best customers with Google Analytics. And as mentioned, we'll have Powell from Google Global Products team, he's the lead of data integrations, be speaking with Don as well to give you guys some insights into how to track and understand your customers. Quick housekeeping notes. Please feel free to ask questions both in the question field on the GoToMeeting as well as in our #Analytics Week forum Google group. Here we're trying to make it very interactive, so feel free to come post your questions, comments, and interact with other analytics nerds. We'll also be posting all questions and answers from the session on our blog, just blog.netelixir.com. And tomorrow, please join us for our final session where we'll be jumping into some information on IBM's Watson and how you can use that to further increase your revenues. Any feedback, please send to analytics@netelixir.com. And that's the email address you can also use to take advantage of our complimentary offers and enter our puzzle contest. So from yesterday, we have 1 winner so far of our Chromecast challenge. So there's still time to enter. Here you'll see the 2 questions that that you'll need to answer and send to analytics@netelixir.com. And there's still an opportunity to win a Chromecast, so definitely take advantage of that. For today, we have our complimentary offer again. It is the Google Analytics Scorecard. This is the same offer as Monday, but it has been our most popular offer, so please shoot us an email if you're interested in taking advantage of that. And again, today we will have our thought experiment revealed at the end of the session, and the first right answer will win a $25 gift card. And again, if you've answered all 5 correctly, you'll win a $100 gift card. With that quick intro, I will hand it over to Don and we'll kick off today's session. To you, Don.
Thank you. If you've attended our prior days, you know that we are fans of polls. So today I have a quick poll to open the day. I'm asking you about your e-commerce website. If it is an off-the-shelf platforms, like Magento or Volusion, Demandware, is it a custom-coded site? Is it a combination of custom-coded and off-the-shelf, or perhaps it might even be a combination of off-the-shelf platforms such as like WordPress and Magento? And hey, if you don't know, so. And for our guest Paul, who is on the phone, who we weren't able to get him logged into our session. He won't be able to see the screen, so.
Don, does that mean that I can just speed through the presentation and we're just going to go one by one? I think so.
Yeah. Actually, I'm going to be scrolling through it is the way my PDF thing was working. So here, I'm going to close it out. It's very interesting. And share those results with the group, and then I'll read them off for you. So 35% use a combination of custom code and off-the-shelf platforms. I'll say I'm a little bit surprised by that. The off-the-shelf platforms are the minority at 17%. Custom-coded engine and CMS is 26%, and then a combination of standard platforms is 13%. So very interesting. Okay. I have a couple of opening thoughts before I introduce our guest speaker. So let me just share those with you. All right. So today, our topic today is on the user ID feature of Google Analytics Universal Analytics. It is the path for Google Analytics users to identify and track their most valuable customers. It is part of Google's, I think migration might be a good word, towards a user-centric view of analytics, away from its origins in a visit or sessions-based analytics, right? And the idea is essentially that on your website, you have the ability to identify visitors, like when they log into their account, or if they were driven to your website from your email marketing platform. And so the idea essentially is to leverage that capability for you to identify a subset of your visitors and pass that information into Google Analytics in a non-personally identifiable way, right? So like in my past life, we had a thing called a customer number. So every time someone created an account on our website, they got a customer number. So you could pass customer number into Google Analytics. And that's what I was attempting to show here in this bottom graphic here, right? So, taking that identity that that person, and passing that into Google Analytics, and then essentially being able to create a what I'll call is a subset of your audience that who they are and what they're doing. So to give you sort of an insight into the power that this feature has, these are numbers for one of our clients, and what we did was sort of as a precursor to migrating to taking advantage of user ID, is we captured the Google Analytics cookie ID for their users and put it in a custom dimension in their analytics account. And this data is the first 79 days that we had captured that information. So you can see we had 447,000 unique devices that we captured during those 79 days for a total of 1.2 million sessions. But really, the power comes in looking at the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. So in terms of frequency of visits, which you see there on the left, right? So coming to this company's website more than once a day, right, was a very smidgen of their user set, 0.04%. But look at the percentage of sessions and particularly the percentage of orders. So if you look at 0.04% versus 0.44%, that's 11-to-1 ratio of orders to devices, right? And then if you look at the second bucket, which I categorized as greater than once a week, right? The percentage of devices grows a little bit. And then take a look at that ratio. You have 15% of orders being generated by a little less than 3%. It's a little more than 5 to 1. And then the final row there is 14% of those devices generating 44% of their orders. If you add that up, almost 70% of their orders are coming from less than 17% of their audience. I'll say that again. 70% of their business coming from 17% of their audience. And again, this is devices. It's GA cookie IDs, so it's devices. And you know we have cross-device behavior happening, so it's an even smaller number of people, right? So that's the power of this user ID capability, is because in theory, this client could know who those 17% are and track their behavior over time. So one of my favorite examples is theoretically you could be looking at your Google Analytics data and you could know, for example, when some of your top customers have not visited you in a certain amount of time. So like I say, it's a powerful feature. This is one of my last slides before I introduce Paul. Google just announced this User Explorer feature a couple weeks back, I think, right? So for what you see here is a view of a unique user ID value, and you can actually see that person's behavior on the website. So, you know, and this also includes not only page views, it includes events, right? So if you have your site tag to track certain types of events that are important to you, like watching a video or downloading a PDF or anything like that. You can actually see that behavior at the individual user ID level. So again, it's pretty powerful stuff. So I am going to introduce Paul. I am super pumped that he is taking time out of his schedule. I think we mentioned earlier, he's joining us for Europe, and that was some of our little technical difficulties. So here's what I could tell you that I could glean about him, other than he's been a Googler, I think, since at least 2011, right? It's very obvious from his Google Plus page that he travels a lot, which, again, we're extremely grateful that he's taken time out to talk to you guys about this stuff today. And I noticed that he loves to share pictures of the places he's been. I don't know where this picture is on the left, but I thought it was a particularly striking photograph, probably taken out an airplane window. Like a very good friend of mine, he's into scuba diving. And I'm guessing by a couple of photos I saw on that Google Plus page that when it comes to the Star Trek versus Star Wars debate, that he is on the Star Wars side of the equation. So with that, I am going to just give me a second to kind of change up screens here. And I'll tell you when we are ready to start.
Can you hear me, Don?
Yes, I can hear you fine. If there's anybody in the audience who cannot hear him, please let us know via the question chat. And, oh, I know, sorry. You guys are looking at a picture of my beautiful kids, sorry. I forgot to do one thing. Duplicate. I'm going to go back. Okay, let's try this. All right. I should offer a Chromecast to anyone in the audience who could tell me where that photograph was taken. So anyway, I've got the title slide up, Paul, so take it away and just kind of clue me in. I'm scrolling in my PDF viewer, so.
Yeah, Don, by the way, I'm actually dialed in via Citrix. I managed to override the system settings, so I'm already dialed in and I can actually see your screen, so that's perfect.
Okay. Cool.
So, okay, guys, hi, hello. A few things to correct, maybe let's go in that way, since it's an open format here. I actually do not like to share my travel pictures, and as you have seen probably done on my Google Plus profile page, the last picture was from around 2 or 3 years ago, I think.
Okay.
Since that time, I actually very much do everything I can to remove all the social stuff about me from any type of a crawling mechanism and algorithm. That actually includes Google. So that's like a tip. But that being said, hi everyone. It's actually great to be here. I'm the global product lead on Google Analytics and data integrations on the Google front. I actually am based in Mountain View right now, since I'm again unfortunately traveling. I'm dialing from Europe and from Poland in particular. We're going to deep dive into the user ID feature today. I'm going to go through the general stuff around cross-device as an ecosystem at Google and cross-asset measurement. I'm going to try to explain to you guys what it exactly means and what do we mean by asset measurement versus device measurement. The presentation is split between some technical pieces and some more general case studies, use cases overview. I'm more than happy to go way beyond that depending on the questions that you raise. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to ask questions throughout the presentation. Don, can you correct me if that's going to be possible?
Sorry, I had my microphone muted. Yeah, they can submit the questions during the presentation, and then what we'll do is we'll just go through them at the end, and that's awesome that you're willing to stay late. So
yeah,
I think that'll be the best.
So I'm going to try to, if you guys submit a specific question that requires an immediate answer on clarification, just please do submit the question. I'm going to see it in the panel. Worst case, I can address it in real time, and if not, then we can go forward and answer them at the Q&A stage. So let's go. Don, can you please move to the next slide? Thank you so much. So guys, as I mentioned, let's first go through the general cross-device measurement attribution solutions overview at Google, which is the cross-platform type of an overview. As you know, we have two advertising platforms, which is Google AdWords and Google DoubleClick. And then we have the one big measurement platform, measurement attribution platform at Google, which is actually Google Analytics, and that applies both to GA as well as GA 360 Suite, which you have already heard of probably during our launch a few months ago. Every single cross-device and data integration, in this particular case, as the slide shows, solution at Google derives from the most basic measurements and tracking capability that we have created. In other words, for AdWords, we have a measurement solution, measurement and now even attribution solution, as you have probably seen based on the recent launches, which is called the conversion tracking. And out of that feature, we have actually rebuilt the cross-device measurement capability, which is the cross-device conversions based on Google sign-in data, which from your perspective is third-party data. The same methodology applies to DoubleClick. Out of DoubleClick, we have rebuilt a similar feature to cross-device conversions that is working in AdWords, just dedicated to DoubleClick, which is a bit enhanced, also based on Google sign-in data. And then for Google Analytics in particular, you're able to see cross-device paths, which is actually the current report, based on user ID, which is the feature we're going to discuss today. And this feature is 100% based on proprietary authentication, which is your sign-in, login authentication mechanism that you decide to track your users with. The one key differentiator between all those solutions is that with Google Analytics, all the data is measured and tracked at the user level, and it goes way beyond the device itself. It actually goes at the entire user path, which in this case means across devices and as well as across assets. In this particular case, we refer to assets as web versus app, for example. Let's go to the next slide, please. So, what is our, as Google, positioning of those features? So as I mentioned already, we have two types of login-based solutions. The first party, which is based on your proprietary authentication, which is your site login, as it has been mentioned earlier by Don. And that's something that is and will be, in the next months and probably years to come, the most robust user-centric measurement feature that will exist, that will come out from Google. I can address more advanced and sophisticated use cases for it later on as we go through user ID in general. And then the second one is the third party. In other words, to optimize for media within a media-centric view. That is where we actually recommend that you use the Google AdWords, Google DoubleClick, cross-device features, in other words, based on Google sign-in data to optimize media directly in an automated and more media-centric way. As you know, the key differentiator between those two is also that, as with all the other advertising platforms, the attribution model changes. In AdWords case, it's the last AdWords click attribution. In analytics, it's the last non-direct click attribution for any single media channel that you're driving your data with. That's why the tracking methodology also differs, and that's why the user ID feature and thus the first-party login-based solution can be actually as robust as is this required by the users worldwide. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so let's go through the cross-device measurement with Google Analytics. In other words, let's deep dive into the feature itself and other pieces. So, as you all know, hopefully, if not, then this is a good reminder. For Google, we have the standard tracking in Analytics. The standard tracking in Analytics is based on a cookie ID, which is Google Analytics generated ID in the created cookie or existing cookie. That cookie input is actually called the client ID, that value. This value is persistent as long as the cookie exists, but it is environment, device, and asset based. In other words, if you change your browser, if you change your device, if you change your environment, and so on and so forth, the cookie will have a new client ID value. In other words, you're going to be tracking the user, the same user, as a new user in that across every single one of those different environments. This is something that we call the cookie-based tracking in Analytics, in Google Analytics, and you have all heard of it. And this is how it has been always and at all times. It does not enable standard cross-device tracking, and thus you're not able to actually do cross-device and user-centric type of attribution. Out of that feature, to meet the micro requirements, we have actually rebuilt something much more robust, which is the next slide, which is the user-based, user-centric tracking in Google Analytics. As you already have heard, we have the client ID, which is the Google Analytics generated user identification ID. Now, to be able to track users across devices in the first-party data world, and by first-party we mean data that belongs to you as our users, we actually built out a feature that is called User ID. The feature is actually based on a super simple methodology. As long as you can authenticate the user on a specific device, you're able to actually link that data across all the devices and across all the different environments. In other words, you need to be able to authenticate that user. As soon as the user logs in on every single environment, every single device, Google Analytics will stitch that data and create a user-centric type of reporting across all the analytics reports. This is called the persistent ID. Persistent ID meaning as long as the authentication is there, you're able to keep track of the user no matter where the user is or what type of device and so on and so forth the user enters your website from. What else I can add here? There are multiple login methodologies that we can actually discuss, and we'll have an opportunity to do that later beyond the standard web authentication. But the key feature, and as we have already witnessed across multiple examples, the most robust and the most reliable solution is actually a standard web login. Let's move on to the next one, please.
Sorry, I keep realizing that my microphone is muted when I say yes.
Okay, no worries. So as I mentioned, the methodology is super simple. You have to be able to authenticate the user. When you authenticate that user on every single device, you need to assign that user with this unique authenticated ID. That ID needs to come from your authenticated platform. You can also use features such as Facebook Connect or Google Plus Sign-in to be able to authenticate the users. This feature does this particular Google Analytics feature, since it's a first-party measurement solution, it does not rely on Google login data. This is the key differentiator from the other ones that you have seen earlier. As long as you are able to authenticate and assign the user ID to those users, Google Analytics will do the rest. We'll stitch the data with proper timestamps and we'll be able to create a user-centric type of a measurement attribution across all of its reports. Let's move on to the next one, please. Now, the one key value that I already mentioned earlier is that this goes way beyond cross-device and cross-asset measurement, and at the same time cross-device and cross-asset measurement implies that it goes for user centricity, which is the new sort of a theme that we're entering, and it will be much, much more popular in 2017, and there will be many more solutions on the market out there, hopefully also from Google, around lifetime value measurement and attribution, both the current lifetime value as well as the predictive lifetime value that is based on actual users versus cookies. In other words, we'll be able to stitch everything and everywhere, and you'll be able to report, attribute, and actually act on that type of data. Yeah, I think we can go through the use cases and how you can do that today exactly later on in the next slides. So let's move those. Okay, enabling user ID. Let's go through the quick overview just to get rid of some of the myths that are out there on how to enable user ID and how complex it is, as some people claim that it is, but actually it's not. So how do you enable the user ID? As you know, user ID needs to be enabled across two modules. The first one is within the analytics UI. It's in the admin section, tracking info user ID. You need to go through, of course, the user ID policy. You have to read through the few pages. Then you need to set up the user ID online, which is hard-coded on the web, or use a tag management system, which we'll review in a second, to actually enable it on your platform. And then once you go through that process, you need to create a user ID view. What that basically means is that the user ID data, as some of you know, hopefully by now, is nested under a separate view in Google Analytics. What that means is that as long as the user ID is present in the analytics hits, in other words, you're able to assign that user ID, in other words, authenticate the user online, and the user ID is sent with the web visit data, that data will be reported only in the user ID view. That's why we actually have split this feature into two separate views to be able to differentiate between the different type of data sets. Let's go to the next slide. Now, that means that in GA you will have two data sets. One is the standard view that is based on the client ID, which is the standard analytics tracking ID that you have seen earlier in the previous slides. And that's the standard all hit type of data view, where all the data is reported. And then the moment you are able to assign the user ID to the user, that data starts being reported in the user ID view separately. Next slide, please. One key feature that we need to emphasize at this stage, at the user ID setup stage, and also that relates to the particular split of the different views, is the session unification, as we call it sometimes, same session unification. So based on what I said earlier, one could imagine that if a user browses through your site, does the research, tries to purchase multiple products, tries to research multiple products, and then makes the purchase. If you authenticate that user right prior to the purchase making step, that means that the user ID data would be reported only from the moment of the authentication, which is from the moment of the purchase. That would mean that all the research behavior prior to this actual purchase would not be reported in the user ID view. That would imply that we're missing a huge piece of information so vital for the research to purchase patterns, user patterns and behavior. To actually be able to tackle that, we have created something that is called same session unification. What that enables, and it's enabled by default, is whenever the user enters your site, as long as the user authenticates, which means has the user ID assigned to him in that particular session, we're going to move all the data prior to the authentication, which is prior to the assignment of the user ID, into the user ID view for that single session only, so that you do not lose the research information that comes with the user upon authentication. All that data only for that one single session, prior to the authentication, prior to the user ID being assigned to the user, is being moved into the user ID view, and you're able to see that data afterwards across all of the reports to have the full funnel of research online, purchase online in one particular reporting set. We can discuss enhancements to the feature later on in the next slides. Can we move to the next one, please? Thank you. So everyone claims that user ID implementation is such a complex matter. Just to clarify, it's not. It's not, as long as you're actually using any type of a tag management system. The implementation of user ID is going to be super simple and super easy for any single developer, not to mention the marketer itself. When you use a tag management system, the only thing you need to do is to be able to identify and find that variable that comes with user authentication surfaced somewhere on the web. If it's not there, your web developers are more than capable of surfacing that from a server-side implementation onto a client-side, or you can actually fetch it with any type of a jQuery directly. What that means is that majority of the websites globally, and I'm not going to relate to specific examples, but you can check it out on your own, whenever the user authenticates, which means whenever the user logs in online, the variable, which is the unique identification of that for that particular user, is already surfaced somewhere. The most common culprit for this type of implementation is actually JavaScript variables. Majority of the global sites, upon authentication, surface the JavaScript variable with the ID for the authenticated, the logged in user already on the web. That means that any type of a tag management system can easily fetch it. Custom JavaScript variables and so on and so forth are easily accessible on the web. If that's not the case, which means that the ID is not surfaced, either in the DOM element or a variable and so on and so forth, you can actually very easily fetch it with a few scripts, so your developers can hard code it into Google Tag Manager. One thing that we advise strongly is to avoid hard code, like not maybe avoid, but to use a tag management system at all times. We're already in the 21st century, and this seems to be the new trend, which is more than justifiable. With tag management, implementing user ID takes a few minutes. To be precise, 2 minutes, 13 seconds, and if you actually do not have the variable for the ID surfaced on the web already, that may take a few minutes longer. But every single developer with a tag management system is able to actually complete that task easily. Let's move on to the next slide. Now, just to go through the next piece is, as I mentioned at the beginning, user ID brings not only cross-device view, but also cross-asset, which is web to app. We have a few solutions for that. We actually had a few more slides here, but we decided to remove them for one particular reason. The second solution, which is more of a workaround, is a bit complex, and thus we are recommending this one. The solution is called roll-up properties. In other words, the recommendation on our side, if you want to actually report data between the web and app, jointly in a hybrid way, as some people call it, is to use the roll-up properties. In other words, to enable Google Analytics, one property for tracking the web traffic, another separate property to track the app traffic, and then use the roll-up properties to merge those two properties together. The only thing you need to make sure is that you have a user ID view, in other words, user ID enabled views across both web and app. Google Analytics, for those two particular views, will do the rest. In other words, it's going to link the data between web and app that comes with the user ID. Since the user ID is always the same, it's persistent, it's the same value between web and app, Analytics will join it all together, measure it up, and provide you with the right reporting across those two types of assets. That actually also implies the complete user centricity, which is you will be able to track the full lifetime value and, in general, the full user path and behavior across all of your e-commerce platforms. Let's move on to the next one. If you want to hear about the other solution, we can discuss it later. One point to make, roll-up properties is only a Google Analytics 360 feature, which is, as you remember, the previous name, Google Analytics Premium. There is a way to do it for non-GA360 accounts. We can discuss it. However, please be very mindful that that Analytics has heat limits that are included in our terms and conditions. Unfortunately, merging web and app data will definitely make you go way above those limits. So that's something to be mindful of. We can discuss later on if such question arises from you guys. Let's go to the next slide. I'm trying to move fast since I hope you'll have lots of questions, and I'm happy to actually go through any cases, use cases, if you want to hear the projects that we're working on.
I'm sorry, I was taking notes. So do you want to go to case studies?
Yeah, let's go to case studies.
Okay.
So we wanted to show you a few examples of how other advertisers, customers of Google, have used user ID data, and in particular the cross-device paths reports to drive meaningful device insights. So let's take the first one, which is actually a very famous case from Galeries Lafayette. I can actually tell you something more later on that Galeries Lafayette did, but let's leave it for later. So let's move on. So first case is actually from Galeries Lafayette. So Galeries Lafayette enabled the user ID view, and based on the user ID data aggregated in that view, they were able to identify key patterns across the different devices. The mobile devices were overrepresented for product discovery, which means that people are coming from mobile devices to do standard browsing through multiple types of pages, categories, and items. Tablet was actually a bit above the average when it comes to product selection, adding to cart but saving the cart without making the purchase. And of course, desktop was way overrepresented for the actual final purchase finalization. One point that actually Galeries Lafayette identified was that 60% of all their users, of their mobile visitors, were also cross-device visitors. That means that as long as the user used mobile to enter their site, majority of those users were also using an accompanying device, which is either a desktop or tablet, which is something you're going to see in the next slide. Let's move on. Thank you, Don. So based on the numbers that were generated out of the user ID view, 63% of mobile users were also cross-device visitors. And the 87% of revenue implying a mobile visit was made by cross-device users. What that means is that 87% of all the revenue that had mobile touchpoint, mobile visits, or a visit from a mobile device, also had another device on that particular path. In other words, only 13% of total revenue generated within the analyzed path was coming from a single device. And 87% of that revenue was always a cross-device type of a revenue. Let's move on to the next one, please.
I can say wow to that, right?
Yes, you can. And I agree, that's a wow. I'm just trying to see why is there, just 1 second. I'm trying to identify one potential error with numbers. I'm just trying to revert back on my slide if there is an error. Yeah, there was an average taken in the other side. Not important. Let's just move on. It's just an average input. And the next one actually that we identified, and this type of a user was the average purchase. What it came out is that whenever the user used more than a single device, which means at least 2 devices, the average revenue per user was actually much, much higher. In other words, Galeries Lafayette identified that if they were able to engage the users across multiple screens at all times, they were able to generate a much higher revenue from those users. And here I need to make one point. Yes, you can make a comment and an argument that these are loyal users since they are logged in users, and thus those users actually in general generate more revenue. But guys, keep in mind that for those users that were using single devices, they are also loyal users. We're talking only about logged-in visitors. It just means that whenever a user has a very good cross-device experience and is able to be engaged by you across devices, that user is able to make those purchases at different times of the day. And this type of a cross-device engagement and being there across all the different devices means that you're sort of incentivizing those users to make those transactions across those different platforms. So one argument could be made, it's loyal users, but keep in mind that the entire report here is based on loyal users, which is logged in users. Let's move on to the next one.
All right. That was another wow. 300% on 3 devices. It's pretty impressive.
And actually, there's going to be another report that will show something similar from another customer, just so that you don't think that this is a biased type of an insight, guys. And this is actually my favorite one. When we generated the insights and we created this case study, this is actually my favorite one. So in general, everyone knows the insights that have been there earlier, guys, on the first slide from Gary Lafayette, which means that you use the mobile device to actually do the research. Then the tablet also comes in when you add it to the basket, and then, of course, desktop for the purchases. The one thing that no one expected in this particular case, since this is Gary Lafayette, was what happened afterwards. It came out that people were coming back from mobile devices to check the status of their order, or to actually confirm an in-store pickup if that was the availability of that. In other words, that means one thing. You are able to re-engage those users on the mobile device afterwards, after the purchase is technically completed, to do upsells and cross-sells with different types of advertising. In other words, and I'm saying in other words way too many times, I'm just trying to emphasize that there is another opportunity that goes way beyond the standard purchase funnel, where you can re-engage your users and actually incentivize them to perform more actions on your e-commerce platform. And let's move on.
Very interesting.
I just like this slide, so that's why it's actually more or less here.
Yeah.
The next case that we actually had, we have a few others. We can attach them later on, is from CitiesFound, which is an e-commerce, typical e-commerce platform. As you know, Gary Lafayette also has offline stores, brick-and-mortar stores. So CitiesFound, we try to mesh those insights a bit for you guys. So CitiesFound actually identified something else, and those key numbers, which is 3 and 7 multiplier. It came out that cross-device users for CitiesFound are up to 3 times more likely to convert. In other words, when they are engaged across 3 screens, they convert much faster and are more likely to convert. But the second one is actually much more insightful. Those users had an average order value up to 7 times higher than the average for the entire site, which means that if you can engage them across screens, and if you can keep those users loyal to your brand, or in general loyal to your site, they will be much more likely to spend in each transaction more money with you. Let's go on to the next one.
You are understating these results. I just want to say that. That's
I'm understating them because, yes.
7 times?
I think I'm used to those. I'm used to those slides.
Okay.
I'm used to that case, so maybe that's why. Yep. But yes, I agree. This does shake everyone who actually sees those. That being said, we actually present them here for the first time, so that's actually pretty nice. And then actually the next part is that mobile impacts more than 1/3 of all the converting paths. What that basically means is something that you have seen in Gary Lafayette as well. 33% of all the conversion paths had a mobile touch point in them, which means mobile was within the cross-device funnels or the purchase funnels across devices. Let's move on. For Gary Lafayette, that number, as you remember, was a bit higher. This is actually something that we like to do a lot, and we started proposing it a lot with the user ID reports, is the attribution. Every single user of Google's is actually focused very much on cross-channel attribution. User ID brings a new perspective into that table, which is it allows you not only to do cross-channel attribution, but also cross-device attribution. Exactly. And as much as it becomes much more complex to do these types of things, there is a simple report that you can generate with the cross-device paths in the user ID view that will allow you to do this type of an attribution. In other words, to create any type of the standard basic models. The standard model in Google Analytics, as you know, is last non-direct click. For CitiesFound, when they attributed the value equally to all the different devices that took place that were on the conversion paths or funnels, as you want to call them, it came out that mobile was undervalued and should be reevaluated by 60%, which means it actually impacted to some extent 60% more transactions. This is a super simple report that you can do. Yes, I know that applying a linear model is a biased thing as well as applying the first or the last click, and we've been that road before. But I just want to say one thing. It's still much better than using the standard last click model, where you would claim in the cross-device world and with visible cross-device funnels, where you would say that only the last device impacted or should be 100% attributed towards that conversion. So again, you're choosing sort of a middle ground here, not to say that one single device contributed, especially if that one single device was only used for the conversion rather than for the research plus conversion itself. And that's something that the reports can actually deliver to you. Let's go on to the next slide, please. Thank you.
Sorry, I went the wrong way.
Yeah, no worries. Or actually, maybe I did paste them twice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think they were pasted twice, unfortunately. And now, guys, I actually wanted to go through the more important part, which is enhancing user ID. Every single user that we have discussed this case with raises one valid point, the volumes. And I agree with that point more than ever. As you know, user ID relies on a proprietary user authentication, which is first-party type of authentication that belongs to your site, which is your own web authentication platform. That means that not every single user is logged in, and that basically means that the volume of data in the user ID view is always to some extent limited. A few years ago, and I'm going to actually give you some tips here, maybe, a few years ago, nobody cared about the logins. Nobody saw the value in general in driving logins and user authentication, in particular for lifetime value measurement. What that means is that user ID is not only an authentication or login type of a platform, but in general, it enables you to create a completely different type of a strategy. Can you just give me 1 second, please?
Yes, sorry.
I'm back, guys. Sorry. Okay, so as I mentioned, user ID is not only about web authentication. It's not only about you providing a login to be able to track the users. It's also something much more enhanced, much more powerful, which is to change the whole brand or the whole site strategy and to actually make a choice between making sure that you pay for the users and pay for the clicks everywhere, to be present everywhere so that you don't lose your users, or to pay more for a user now, make those users loyal, and then focus on remarketing, cross-sells, and upsells in the future, knowing that whenever the user has a choice of making a purchase, the first place the user is going to come to is going to be your site versus actually your competitors. So there are 2 points we want to address here. First one is how to enhance the login user base via technology mechanisms. And the second one is how to enhance the login base via standard strategy change. In other words, move into the lifetime value, move into the user loyalty type of a strategy and actionability. The enhancing of the login user base on the technology side means a few things. First one is something that you already know, is to extend the cookie expiration and duration. I can give you a good example. I should give you an example from Google, but let's maybe change the theme a bit and let's do it with Facebook, as you see in the screenshot here. As you know, whenever you're logged into any of those platforms, which is Gmail, which is Facebook, whenever you're logged in, whenever you return, you're always logged in, which means this is a persistent login that keeps you logged in as long as you are actually logged in, unless you explicitly say log out. Well, maybe that does not apply to Facebook much, given the recent announcements and the recent issues that they are facing. But in general, the rule is simple. Unless you state log me out, you're being tracked as a logged in user. So if you extend your first party, your proprietary login authentication cookie, you're able to keep the users logged in at a longer duration in general. The second one that we recommend is to use emailing auto-logins. What that basically means is that whenever you send an email into your customer, when the customer clicks on that particular email, you are able to auto-authenticate the user when he lands on that specific page. In other words, auto-login that user when the user comes from an email. You're also able to go way beyond that and do something that we call impressions to clicks and actionability tracking, which means you're able to implement the analytics tracking pixel within the email, server-side fired, for example, measurement protocol request, and you're able to track the impression, which means that the user has opened your email. Then when the user clicks on an email, which is the event that is being fired by a measurement protocol on your server as well. And then when the user lands on your page, you're able to see that the user actually opened that particular page that the email was driving the user to. So you're able to track the full funnel on top of it. And that can be done with the measurement protocol client, in this case also user ID, this is the main purpose here, in standard Google Analytics. And then the third one that I already mentioned earlier.
Can I just interject? I love that idea. I never thought of that. That's an awesome idea. So also, while I'm interrupting, I just want to give everyone a time check.
Can you hear?
Yes, yes. We're pushing up against our time limit, but we're going to run long, as Paul alluded to earlier.
It's my turn.
Can everyone hear him? Can you hear me? Can you let us know on the question chat? I think we're going to keep moving forward. Go ahead, Paul. I'm sorry. Are you there?
Don, can you hear me?
Yes,
I think
yes.
I'm losing. Okay, sorry. I think I was losing the connection for a second.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Okay,
I think I'm back.
Go ahead. You have the floor.
Sorry. No, don't worry about that. I think I was losing the connection. It showed actually that it's dropping down the speed. So yeah.
Okay.
And yes, I only heard that you love the idea. I think that was the main message. That's what I heard. So I'm glad you hear that. And actually, this is not, just to clarify, this is not something that is very common. Not many people do that. It involves some technical implementations, but it's actually extremely powerful to be able to see that funnel and to be able to actually rate and value, you can do that with custom values, to rate and value the power of your emailings. Yeah. That way you can also do emailings A/B testing. Depending on the content that you send to your users, you're able to rate whether that email was powerful enough. In other words, an impression is just an email opening, and then if the user clicks and engages with the site, that's an additional value that the email brought for that particular user.
Exactly.
The one thing that I mentioned also is the third-party authentication system, which is also, you can use Google Plus sign-in. I don't know how many of you actually use Google Plus, but if you do, then you can use Google Plus sign-in. And then we have also the Facebook Connect, which is also something very, well, more than just common in the world. Yeah. And then the last one, actually.
I'm sorry, there was a question. Somebody wanted just to repeat what I thought was the awesome idea, and I'll just, I think is it Sam is the name? It's just the idea of embedding in your email marketing campaigns. You're basically able to embed the Google Analytics tracking script so that you can tell, it'll fire when someone opens your email, and then obviously when they click through to your site, you can track that as well. So that was the idea. So, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, so so one way you can do that is with scripts, but unfortunately not all email handlers will actually be able to, like not all the email handlers will actually allow you to execute scripts, even if it's server-side. So, and this, in this particular case, it's not going to be server-side. So what we actually recommend to do is to use measurement protocol instead of that, and just to fire that request on email opening with the specific user ID assigned to it, which actually gives you the exact same insights. The one and key reason here is you would only rely on user ID, not the client ID, which is actually a key point to linking that behavior across devices to see whether someone, for example, does an impression of the email on a mobile device, but then enters from that email from a desktop. But yeah, measurement protocol seems much more reliable than the standard JavaScript library that comes with the analytics.js.
Cool.
Just a point, but yeah, same outcome. And then the one last thing that actually Don already we discussed before this session took place, which is the soft logins.
Yeah.
So this is something that has already been happening for quite some time. In the slide, you can actually see my name there. A soft login is, in my honest opinion, one of the most powerful, robust, and at the same time privacy or user-centric or user-focused privacy type of a solution. What it means is that a site keeps you logged in for a specific amount of time, let's say 30 minutes, then it logs you out only to a limited extent, which means the content of the entire site is still personalized to you, as you can see here on the IHG example. But for you to be able to perform an action, which is a sensitive type of an action, for example, to make a purchase where your credit card is recorded, the only thing you need to do is to enter the password. That way, all of the content is personalized. You still are able to track that user as a logged-in user, but at the same time, you protect that user from unauthorized type of an actionability, which is like making purchases or changing credit card data and so on and so forth, or accessing that data for that matter. This is something that the majority of users worldwide have been using when it comes to login or general authentication on the web, and it has actually proven to be very, very reliable in the long run. That actually touches on another point which I can raise at this stage, which is the new trend for 2017 and 2016 as well. One, of course, is the user-centric measurement and attribution, for which one everyone is heading. The other one is, of course, that comes with it, which is lifetime value measurements, and both on the predictive and current side, historic side. And then is the third one, which is site content personalization. To date, the most robust site content personalization solution was was the server-side cookie personalization, which is much more technically requiring or demanding. As you know, actually, there are also tools that enable you to do that. One of those tools, for example, is Optimizely. I can also speak of another tool that we have just released recently under the GA360 suite, which is called the Google Optimized 360. And that's going to be something that will be even more robust for all of you to get the insights from and to do the testing, personalized type of content testing, if you actually keep the users logged in, because then you're going to be able to measure and attribute it at a user level versus the cookie level, and re-engage those users or test against those users equally across the different devices and assets. So again, this is another point of why login, authentication, user ID, lifetime value, and this type of measurement is so important these days for everyone. But okay, enough talking. Let's move on to the next slide. So these were the techie solutions, as we call them. And now actually come the other solutions, which is general how to drive the users to log in the first place. There's only one rule to that. Incentivize the users. Do not force the users to do that, but incentivize them with amazing opportunities. One thing that we have learned since we have released the user ID feature around 3 years ago now was actually that discounts are not always the most desired type of a way to incentivize the users to log in, but there are much better ones that I personally value more than a 2 or 3% discount on an item. And we discussed it with Don as well before that meeting. For example, the shopping and wish lists. If you can make those shopping and wish lists predictive, in other words, use the data that is nested in your CRM platform based on the past purchases, and expect on top of the wish list, give recommendations, personalized recommendations added to that wish list, for example, next to the items that the user has already selected in the wish list. That's going to be the added value, which is the next one, the personalized recommendations. If predictive, then again, even more powerful. Price alerts. Price alerts are awesome. In other words, for the user to be able to estimate if the price changes by X%, please send me an email. And of course, many others like product reservations for those of you, well, not for you guys, most of you, like your majority of you is e-commerce, but if you enable, or if some of you on on the call are not only e-commerce but also brick and mortar store users, then this would also more than likely apply. Discounts and offers also are very common. One thing that we have actually been testing, and we tested that in February 2016 with one of the big brands, was to do a special targeted pre-sale for members only, on the site itself, which means that if the users were logged in and they have received the email, upon clicking on the email, they were directed to a personalized site with sales items, even though the sale has not launched for all the users. That actually proved to be, and we hope to have a case study out of it in the coming months, that proved to be extremely powerful, and we were able to re-engage all the users to log in back and return back again to the site itself. Cool, we can move on. To summarize those things, I just need to mention a few. So there have been many users, Google's customers that we've been working with over the past years that actually use the user ID feature, and there are some tips that we summarized. The first one is, of course, change the strategy. Logging in is not only about the logging in, it's also a loyalty strategy. In other words, either you have to pay for those users all the time to make sure they come back to your site and not a competitor. In other words, fight for those users at all times, or you can switch them to loyal users and make them come to your website on their own. Second, you need to be able to incentivize the users to keep them logged in. Soft logins, incentives such as the ones we discussed, and many other solutions can also be used, for example, persistent cookies. And the third one, please implement the feature using the tag management symbol. It's much, much simpler, much, much faster, and much, much easier for all the developers. Not to mention most of it can only be done in a few minutes. Let's move on to the next one. This is actually an example of a brand, Despegar, which some of you, well, most of you probably already know. Despegar has just recently changed their strategy into this one. They are actually now offering an amazing value to those users that log in. They actually create this pop-up, which the users can close. Most of them, hopefully, I do assume, would not close it. And they show you the value. If you log in once, what's the value that you get? Recommendations from your friends, which is actually something very unique and something really awesome. Discounts, which is the easiest one. Managing bookings, but most of all, creating favorites. If you add to that predictivity, for example, based on your past 5 trips, what could be the next one you would be likely to actually take, and thus this is the flight for it, that's more than amazing for the users. And that's more than, well, the standard lifetime value itself. And let's move on to the next one, please. So, the last piece that we wanted to show you, just like some small pieces of it, is actually the cross-device insights you can get from the user ID view. When you enable the user ID view, if you have already enabled it, you get a dedicated set of reports called cross-device suite. The cross-device suite currently consists out of 3 reports: device overlap, device paths, and acquisition device reports. The device overlap report shows you 7 rows and this nice visualization on top of it, which is actually the sequencer, the interactive type of a chart. Whenever you hover your mouse over one of those squares in that particular chart, you're going to be able to see the percentage of the users that interact between those devices and the revenue that they generate, if you, of course, have e-commerce enabled for it. It's a very easy way to actually understand what percentage of all the users, the logged-in users, are cross-device users, and how much money do they generate in general, depending on how many devices they enter from. On the next slide, you guys actually have
this one.
Thank you so much. You have the 7 rows. Sorry? No?
Yeah, I was just saying yes.
Sorry, thanks. Okay. So I'm trying to go fast so that we can actually go through the questions if there will be any. Someone actually asked a question. Can you repeat the awesome idea?
Yeah, we did that one.
Awesome. Oh, okay, that's awesome. Sorry. So, okay, so the next one actually, as I mentioned, so in the same report, below the nice visualization, animated chart, interactive chart, however you want to call it, guys, you have the table. The table consists only of 7 rows. The rows display all the different devices type of, how do you call it, sequences, but it's not a sequence per se, combinations, let's call it. The sequence does not matter here, so whether it's desktop mobile or mobile desktop, in this particular report it does not apply to it. The one value from that report is to actually work with the numbers that you have on the right-hand side. We created a nice ratio out of it, a ratio that we call the cross-device impact ratio. It's nothing complex. It's as basic as it can be. The only thing that it shows you is how much of the revenue generated on your site comes from cross-device type of users, which means how much revenue is dependent on the cross-device engagement and interaction. So if you were not to engage with those users, what could be the value that you're missing on top of it?
Interesting.
One thing that I can add is that this report is now being enhanced, and you're going to see, if you don't see it yet, I'm sorry for that, it's going to be actually enhanced, and you're going to be able to see desktop web, and then for mobile, you're going to be able to see mobile web and mobile app if you're using the solution that we have discussed earlier, which is the cross-asset measurement as well.
Pretty cool.
It's not there yet, probably, so sorry, and maybe I shouldn't be saying those things. But yeah, it's going to be out there. So let's go with that. The next report is actually the device paths. Here, this report abides by the sequences. What that means is that here the sequences actually matter. All of you by now know the multi-channel funnels reports and the top conversions path reports. This report is created based on that exactly. The one thing that you need to be mindful of is I would strongly recommend that you guys customize the path. In other words, what type of paths you want to see until what type of action happens at the end. We've created paths that are based on goals and that are based on transactions depending on your need, which means they do not have to actually generate the revenue itself, but can be to a specific, for example, click, video viewing, and so on and so forth, form submission, and many, many others. This report also is now enhanced with the web and app type of a split. Okay, you're going to be able to actually see in the slides more. We have some recommendations on it, so we can move on.
All right.
There should be 2 more slides, I think.
All right. Let's see.
So here I'm just going to mention, when you move in that report, when you move in the device paths report from the standard overview into an e-commerce tab, which is marked here with number 2, the one awesome thing that you get, guys, and this is actually pretty cool, is the 2 new metrics that we have created there, which is one is called revenue per user and then the volume of transactions per user. This is really, really cool. This is actually the actual user-centric type of a measurement. You're able to see how much revenue within the different paths has been generated on average per users, which is the insights that you have seen across the case studies that were presented to you guys earlier. And let's move on to the last one, which is the acquisition device report. The report that is probably, and I'm going to say it very openly, the most undervalued report that there is. Most people actually prefer to work with the device paths report and thus customize the paths, export it to a CSV, to an Excel sheet, and actually work there with the data. If you do not want to do that, then you have this report, 3 rows only with the different device types, and then the key metrics that come with the report, which is revenue from originating device. In other words, if device X was the originating device, how much revenue has been generated from it. And then the other one, revenue from other devices, which means if device X was the originating device, how much revenue was generated from those other devices. As simple as that. We have created a small ratio here as well. If you divide those 2 values, so if you divide other devices by originating device, then you're actually, the closer that value is to 1, the more likely or the more cross-device dependent, or in particular cases mobile dependent, your entire e-commerce business is. Which means that you need to be mindful of making sure that the user's mobile experience and engagement is actually of value to them.
Yeah.
And the last one is, I think, thank you note, which means I was able to make it in 40 minutes. Yes, thank you guys for sticking in.
This is awesome.
I know I was fast. I was trying to be as fast as possible so as not to bore you with me talking. So if you have any questions, I'm giving it back to Dan now.
Okay. Well, I've got questions, so I'll give the audience time to submit questions, and I'll start with mine. So I guess the first question I have is, I sent it to you last night on email, but you probably didn't get a chance to see that yet, is on these device, let's call it device level reports that we've seen here the last 2 or 3 slides. Do you think in the future we'll see the ability to add things like second dimensions and be able to look at, for example, like a campaign path next to a device path?
I can, with 100% honesty, reply that we are already working on it.
Okay.
I can't give you a specific timeline.
Yep.
This has been one of the, as soon as we released user ID as a feature in the cross-device suite report, the report suite, that's the first thing we got as a feedback. And to be very frank, we're actually now finally working on it. So hopefully it's going to happen not so much into the future.
All right. Another question I had was, of the clients that you have worked with on or seen adopt user ID, is there any specific type of business that seems to be adopting it more than others? You know, B2B, B2C, retail versus a, you know, maybe a company that does some sort of service. Just curious to know.
Yep.
I was glancing through our attendees list. I think the majority of our clients that are on the webinar today, I mentioned this in an email last night, are people who do sell to businesses as well as the, you know, some that sell to both businesses and consumers.
Yep. So the user ID feature in particular is a feature we always recommend if you have web authentication online. And then the second condition that we put on top of it is a relatively frequent retention rate. In other words, where you're able to where the users come back to your site in a short period of time. The longer the period of time, of course, the low data you're going to have in the view. To answer your question directly, we have different type of solutions for, so the B2B sector, as you already know as well, of course, more than I do even, is divided into 2 types of segments, where you actually are able to re-engage the users and where the retention rate is high, which is repeated services, repeated type of offerings, and so on and so forth. And then there is also the one where you do one-offs. B2B, for example, can be selling software. When you sell software to companies, they may log in at some stage, but initially all the research and all the contact with the company itself that is selling the software is very rare. In other words, it's a lead form type of a base of industry, mostly. So by the time you're able to actually track the user under user ID, the user has already performed thousands of actions, which you're missing out on. For that industry, we actually recommend that they use the client ID, and thus, of course, they would be missing the cross-device view. But at the same time, they are able to do the full offline to online attribution via client ID and measurement protocol. In other words, as long as you have the authentication and you have the users coming in frequently, relatively frequently to the site, I do trust that the feature is going to apply to both businesses, which is B2C, C2C, or B2C or B2B. The only challenge is, of course, the volumes at that stage. And then we have the solution that can enhance that for B2B, and I can tell you that we have B2B users that actually do it, which is called the persistent IP. In other words, you need to rephrase that solution. You need to get the user to log in once per device, and then you keep that user logged in or track the user as logged in at all times. To do that, the way you do it is you create a first-party cookie for your website. You push that unique identification value into that first-party cookie, and then you pull it into Google Analytics from that first-party cookie at all times, even if the user is not logged in. That's what the B2B industry has been doing, from my experience to date, to enhance the data and to make sure that the volumes of data that they are seeing in the user ID view is not small enough. Just to clarify one thing only, and sorry, I'm talking too much, but I just want to say that based on the cases we have, this requires a legal check, and of course, please be mindful that the users need to be informed of how you track them with Google Analytics, and they should be given the opportunity to opt out of such tracking.
Right. Related to the idea of like authentication, right? You know, a lot of e-commerce companies, I think it's almost a standard practice nowadays, is that they'll offer the checkout as guest option to people. What have you seen companies do to, one of your suggestions and tips, right, is, you know, sort of create incentives for people to identify themselves, right? So have you seen anything that's kind of, I don't know, different or effective in terms of incenting someone to create an account instead of checking out as a guest, so that you can then give them a user ID value and track them moving forward?
That's actually a very good point. So let's think about, actually, because this differs very much by the regions, so let me maybe relate to it that way. In Europe, in EMEA, what we have identified a lot is that customers have been moving away from the guest checkout option, and they do try to enforce the user to log in, even if it's a one-off purchase, especially in the Eastern European markets, which is, let's call it, east of Germany and south of Germany, southeast of Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to the Western markets, if they give the user the option to do a guest checkout, which is the most common case, what they also do is at the guest checkout, they actually, of course, gather the email address and they make it mandatory. And this is actually the nice thing that they started doing. This is a few cases. I unfortunately cannot name the names, cannot give the names due to, well, I'm a very privacy-centric person, but I can relate to it.
Yep.
So whenever they gather the email address, what they do afterwards is they send out an email offering the users to, with a special offer, to actually create the account. And whenever they come to the site, the first thing that they see is please log in or create an account now. And the moment the user actually opens the email, they already have the user ID assigned.
Aha.
Yes. This is actually a very cool thing, and it has worked very nicely with them. So they assign the user ID even before the user registers. Yeah. They send the email to that user and already start tracking that email sent out. This is the impression we discussed earlier.
Yep.
As an authenticated one, which is user ID 1. And then if the user decides to do it, they come to the site and they register the account with that user ID already assigned to them.
Okay. All right.
And this has worked very well.
All right. I'm going to keep going. If you have time, I'm going to keep going. So
yeah, sure.
If people are still listening, that's great. That was that one. Oh, you said something, I don't remember where, but it gave me an idea. You know, in my past life, I worked for a, you know, a multi-channel retailer, and we had a loyalty program, right? So we had the, you know, the little, what do you call it? You know, kebab that people would use at our brick and mortar stores, and
yes.
We also actually used to send emails to those people with, you know, offers to, you know, purchase online as well. So with user ID, if I was able to, you know, pick an ID value that was shared across my channels, catalog, brick and mortar, and web, right? In theory, then, couldn't I bring in to Google Analytics some of my loyalty program data and associate that with a user ID value in Google Analytics? Like, for example, I could create a, I guess it would be a custom metric that would be like store purchases, and I could see the value of their store purchases in GA as well as the value of their online purchases. Does that make sense?
100%. And we actually already have customers, users doing that.
Got it.
So we actually released recently on the Google Analytics blogspot. You might have seen it. If not yet, then you can actually just check it out. A case study with Petit Bateau. Petit Bateau actually did exactly what you just said, which is they merged the online and offline worlds together, and they started attributing offline transactions to the online traffic.
Yes.
Exactly using the loyalty card in the store.
Got it.
And unifying that with the user ID on web authentication online. We have that case study also. We published it. Wait, when did I publish it? It was in 2000. When did I publish it? 2014 February with Gary Lafayette.
Okay.
Or sorry, 2014 or 2015? Wait just a second. 2015 February. We were doing it in 2014, but we published it in 2015 with Gary Lafayette. Gary Lafayette was actually the first customer globally that did that, which is merged fully online to offline and did fully measurement and attribution across those two different worlds. Using measurement protocol and using Google Analytics user ID feature. I'm happy to show you how the reports look like. We can actually do that in the future, which is how the reports look like, how it works, and what type of insights you can get out of them, because we actually have a full solution built out of it called online to offline with Google Analytics, online to store with Google Analytics.
All right, I found one of my other questions, and I want to be respectful of your time. How many minutes to 12:30? I've got 4 minutes to 12:30, so I'm going to guess that some people in our audience and some people in our audience who will read blog posts, etc., on this topic, like I did in the past, used a third-party like recommendation engine for some of the personalization around products on their e-commerce site. And I was wondering if you're aware of any of the recommendation engines that are out there that might actually allow integration with user ID so that you could, to your point, about like on the wish list, for example, personalizing product recommendations. So like, for example, if I used a platform from Certona in a past life, right, that was our product recommendation engine, and their algorithm is based not only on purchases but also viewership, basically products you looked at, right? So conceptually speaking, I could have a wish list on my site, and in that, to your point, in that wish list could be, in theory, product recommendations that come from, let's say, my third-party recommendation engine specifically for that user ID. Does that make sense?
I think I get the point. I think. So there are two ways to do it. One of the things you can use is actually the feature that we have released with Enhanced E-commerce, but that does not, well, it was released at the same time, but it does not relate to Enhanced E-commerce directly. The feature was called Related Products API.
Yeah.
But the feature gives you something else. This gives you the correlation between a product that you purchase and what other type of a product the user might want to purchase.
Yep.
The only challenge is that feature, well, you could actually make that feature work at a user level. No, you can't. You unfortunately cannot. You unfortunately cannot. But you would be able to do it at an aggregate level. In other words, if someone purchased, let's say, a skirt, how likely are they to purchase a belt versus a shoes? And the other one.
Yep.
Sorry. Go, please go.
No, I was going to say, yeah, that's what those, like Certona, that's what that engine does, right, is, based on the behavior of, your entire user base as well as individuals, right, it creates, recommendations, based on, either where that person is on the site or whatever, right? So, but I guess what I was wondering is if there's a way that you could sort of pipe into an engine like that. Hey, here's the user ID for, right, this particular session, and then that engine can say, oh, wait a minute, I know that, for example, person, because I've cookied that person before, right, and leverage that to, to be a really, truly personalized recommendation for that specific individual.
Yes, so that could actually be the Google Prediction API. But for that to be, for that to actually work the way you would like it to work, that would require a BigQuery connection, which means that you would need to have the raw GA hit data, which is the GA360 feature, and use the Google Prediction API algorithms on top of that. that would be the solution, and that's actually something that we're already sort of doing. I can't disclose more, but I can tell you that we're actually not in the product sense per se on the e-commerce. That we have not done yet. What we're trying to do right now is to use not only RFM models, which, by the way, one of the more famous and more common used models for predictivity, and not only, are actually recency, frequency, and monetization models, which are non-statistical models. And we're actually trying to use prediction API on top of RFM models to actually predict if you switch the volumes of traffic, which means if you switch the budgets that you assign to specific online media channels, how likely are you going to, how likely are the conversions to increase across the different platforms based on this predefined attribution model, which is actually something similar to what you're saying, but this time it's more about the products, which means you query the user ID, you have all the data, and then, so what is the user more likely to buy?
Yeah. Very interesting. All right. I see that we're starting to have our attendees drop off. So I had one last question, but let me just finish up my housekeeping here. You can see the, oh, no, sorry. I know we have puzzle fans in the audience. So there's our thought experiment for today. I'll repeat the fact that if you're interested in the 10-point analytics scorecard health check, just email us at analytics. And again, Paula, thank you very much. I guess the one question I have, it's very selfish because I know I'm going to get it from some of our clients who are interested in this, is something you mentioned back when we were talking about the technical part, particularly if they're using Tag Manager. So I think what I heard you say is that, in a case where, let's say, a value for user ID is not available in a JavaScript variable in the session, then it is possible for a developer to write, a script that can then be loaded into Tag Manager. So, for example, I think what you're talking about is like, you could add a custom HTML tag with the script in it to go fetch that. And I'm wondering, does that apply to like an off-the-shelf platform, like say, for example, Magento was the most popular e-commerce off-the-shelf platform out there, right? So is that something like, if you have a Magento developer, he could just go write you a little script that you stick in an HTML tag, which will just go pull whatever value you're going to want to use out of Magento and have it there for GA to use?
100%. Yes, 100% correct. That means basically that's why, that's exactly why we recommend TMSs, because they can integrate via custom scripts, custom tags, with every type of a platform the web is enabled with.
Terrific. All right. Well, listen, with that, I'm going to, let's draw it to a close. Again, thank you so much. I probably have mispronounced your name, but I can't thank you enough for your, it's tremendous for me. And I know, I know that we have a handful of clients who are definitely highly interested in this. And I'll just, for the few people left on the line, a plug for tomorrow's session. We're going to close out Analytics Week with some fun examples from IBM's Watson platform. But those examples definitely have marketing implications. So I hope you'll join us for that as well. And Paula, thank you a lot. And I'll give a shout out to Lauren, our Google rep, who helped us arrange this guest speaker. She's probably not on the call, but I'll give a shout out to Lauren for this as well. Tremendous. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good day.